You're listening to the Raising Family Podcast with your hosts, David Steele and Linda Hill. Brought to you by thefamilyproclamation.org.
Hello and welcome to the Raising Family Podcast. My name is David Steele, your host, along with co-host Linda Hill. And today we have Glynis Neves with us. She is an educator, a teacher here in Utah. And, we were talking before, and she has actually been teaching since before I was born. That attests more to my youth than to her age. But we are so grateful to have her here with us. She teaches at Providence Hall High School in Harriman. It's a charter school. And we're just really grateful to have her perspective as an educator, as a teacher, on some of these principles in the Proclamation to the Family. So maybe we'll just give a couple of minutes to Glennis to talk about her experience as an educator, why she got into teaching, and then we'll just jump into some questions.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm happy to be here today. I come from an educating family. My grandmother taught in a one-room schoolhouse in Parowan, Utah, in the early 1900s. My father was a professor at then SUSC, now Southern Utah University. My mother was a high school teacher. So I come from a family of educators, a family that really valued education. I didn't always want to be a teacher. It was kind of my fallback. But when my first choice of career didn't look to be going the way I wanted it to, I went back to teaching and found out that I was much better at teaching than I was at my first choice career. So it was not a hardship to become a teacher. I have been teaching since 1992, off and on. I taught for a few years at Tooele High School out in the West Desert of Utah, and taught there for a number of years, and stopped teaching there when I began a family. And I spent almost 20 years raising a family, raising 5 beautiful, I will say, children. And just recently got back into teaching. I have, since coming back, I have subbed for many schools in the Alpine School District. I had a 1-year teaching gig at Lehigh Junior High, and then I ended up at Providence Hall High School, an international baccalaureate charter school, which I absolutely love. Cool. And that's where I am.
So mostly high school, middle school?
Yes. I teach English. So I've taught grades 8 through 12. I love it.
I've always said there's a very special place in heaven for middle school teachers.
Definitely. It's a rough
fun
age.
It's a fun age, but an interesting age. Well, that spans on and off 30 years. We're talking 3 decades.
Yeah. Wow.
In teaching. That's so I'm sure you've seen a few changes along the way, maybe, in how things are done.
It's been eye-opening to reflect on those changes.
Wow. And maybe before we dive in too deep into that, maybe a lot of people listening maybe don't, I speak for myself, don't know the difference between public, private, charter schools. Maybe you could just give us a quick explanation of what a charter school is versus a public or private school.
Our charter school, we are not beholden to a school board. We are beholden to a board of directors that guides the hiring process. We are held accountable to the state core curriculum, to the standards that the state has set for education. But we are more accountable to the parents than to our board. Our students are kind of chosen at lottery to be allowed into our school. It is a public charter school, so we really can't deny anyone. But the size of our building means
it's
that
supply and demand is what that is. That makes it necessary to have a lottery.
Right.
We have something like that in our district too. There's such in high demand.
Yes.
Very interesting.
Very interesting.
We've also become quite a catch-all for our special education department. Being a smaller school, we can offer services for special education that maybe fall through the cracks in a larger public school. Being able to keep our numbers low allows us to do that.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And private is just...
And then private is...
Lots of money.
Lots of money. Right.
And then there's homeschool. So that's basically the 4 types of schooling we're looking at. I think most people understand homeschooling, and we had a little pre-discussion about that, how there's been a lot of strides made in homeschooling as well.
Absolutely.
So lots of options for parents out there.
Yes, absolutely.
That's great.
And also maybe just to clarify, we talked earlier about how the standards for the state come down, and then really it's at the discretion of the school board, the curriculum that kind of is used to reach those standards.
Yes.
And so in a charter school, the curriculum would be more affected by the parents as it would be in a public school.
Right.
Okay.
Teachers are allowed to provide their own curriculum or to write their own curriculum. It then has to be passed by our board of directors, which so it's sent out to the parents. They can have a say on it. The board then votes yes or no, and there you go.
Oh, very interesting.
But it does still have to follow those state guidelines.
Okay.
Nice to know the distinctions. I think that'll be very good for, we'll see, David's going to be a new parent, so I'm
trying to get all the details.
He's trying to get all the details.
Get the information
I'm sure there's a lot of
now.
parents who don't understand all the differences, so it's nice for people to know what the options are. Absolutely.
And maybe, Linda is going to ask a question, but I'm just going to read the paragraph from the proclamation. And I think that'll kind of lead into Linda's next question. So it's paragraph 6. And its parents have a sacred duty to rear their children in love and righteousness, to provide for their physical and spiritual needs, and to teach them to love and serve one another, observe the commandments of God, and be law-abiding citizens wherever they live. Husbands and wives, mothers and fathers will be held accountable before God for the discharge of these obligations.
So that does lead us into this question. As a teacher, and you've been a parent. You said you've been on both sides of that equation there.
Both sides of the divide.
Parental responsibilities. I mean, tell me what you do feel a parent's role is in their child's education.
I think it's a parent's right to choose what's best for their child. No state organization has that ability because every child is different. We all know that. Children don't come with a manual. We have that right as parents to choose what's best for our children, whether that's homeschooling, whether that's public school, private school, charter school. A parent has the right to choose that. But in order to do that, they need to be willing to look at all sides of the equation, to look at what each one of those has to offer for a child. I think the proclamation says this beautifully. We're responsible for teaching them love and service. I can do that as a mom. I can teach my children how to be loving individuals. I can teach them how to serve others. What I can't do is teach them how to add or subtract or anything with numbers. I have to rely on others for that. I have to know my limitations as a parent in order to give my child the best.
But I bet you edit some great papers, don't you?
I edit beautifully.
Great red pen skills.
Right, exactly.
Well, and so, I mean, I would ask maybe specifically as an educator, especially, I've had a lot of interactions with teachers over the years, and I will always be grateful for so many of these teachers that have seen specific needs that my child has, right?
Sure.
And not all teachers are created equal.
Absolutely not. Oh, absolutely.
And I think that's why you said I love what you said about how the parent does have that right to have some say in that, because I think sometimes we do discover there's not a perfect fit.
No one size fits all.
Yeah,
right. No,
sure.
And hats off to teachers, especially this year. I can't even imagine all of the learning curve for teachers.
Yes, absolutely.
And all of that. It's crazy. But when we get back to parents, what are some of the best things you see parents do that facilitate a really positive experience for their children? You know, a really good education. What do parents do to add to that education and encourage that desire to learn?
I think parents have to walk a really fine line with their child. Parents need to be cognizant of what's going on in their children's education. They need to be aware of what the specific policies and procedures of each classroom are. They need to be aware of what curriculum is being taught in each class. They need to be aware of what the teachers, not necessarily beliefs, but how the teacher teaches in order to make that right fit for their child. A parent who is involved to that extent will find that their child is going to succeed. If I know who my child's teacher is, if I know what his teaching philosophy is, if I can look at his records and see his success rate and his fail rate, I can get a better grasp on whether it's going to be a good fit for my child or not. And then I can do something about it. I also think that it's important that parents, once they've made that choice, take a step back and allow the child's educator to educate. And if that means your child fails at a test, at a paper, at an assignment, that's okay. Failing right now is the best learning experience for a child. But if a parent doesn't ever let their child experience that failure, that child never has the experience of how to deal with it, how to get above it, how to grow from that and progress onward from that point.
So you've kind of actually answered my next question too. So you talked about the really good things, and then there's what are some things that you see parents do that sort of sabotage? I know I've seen certain things. Parents, super well-intentioned parents.
Absolutely, I've been one of them.
Right.
I've been one of those that you just want to bubble wrap your child and make it the best possible place for your child, and you don't want them to get hurt, and you don't want their feelings to be hurt, and we want to save our child from all of that heartache that we experienced. But those are the experiences that really teach our children what is important in life. Book learning is great.
Right.
Book learning is fantastic. But actually learning how to be a productive citizen, how to be a productive human being,
critical thinker,
that's something that you need to step back and allow your child to do. So we call them helicopter parents, those that jump in and contact the teacher the minute that grade slips below an A and demands to know what their child is doing or what I am doing wrong, that their child is failing. Those are the parents that are sabotaging their children.
Yeah. That's so funny you say that. That reminds me of when I was in the 4th grade, I got an F on a project, and I don't remember much else I learned in the 4th grade, to be honest. But my family knows. If they're listening to this, they're probably just giggling because I talk about this all the time. That was the first time I received an F on anything. And I remember my mom was like, well, you go talk to her. And I was like, talk to her? That's going to literally kill me. Right. You know what I mean? Oh, yeah. But I did, and it ended up just being a mistake that she had made. Luckily, I am still a straight A student. But it was just interesting to me that was one thing that stuck out to me, was having to go do that, which is something... Yeah, that's just very interesting. And I think that those things are very valuable.
It is. It's one of the best skills you can teach your child, how to advocate for themselves. I'm not going to be around forever. I'm not going to be able to jump in and fix everything for my children as they grow. They have to learn how to advocate for themselves.
Oh, I love the letting the child fail and pointing out some things. I mean, I think it's very easy. I had a child who, I can't remember what, it was one of these oral... what do they call it? An assembly where they choose something to recite and they're judged, and there's a first place and there's a prize and all that sort of stuff. Well, the night before he comes up with some poem or whatever to memorize. I think he's 4th grade. And there's this girl who I know the mom, and I know this girl, she's super on top of things, and she wins every year. Right? Because you can tell the preparation is there, and she studied and practiced. And I just remember him coming home and he's like, oh, she only wins because her mom, blah, blah, is on the PTA board or school, whatever. And as a parent, sometimes it's easy for us to want to cushion our kids. And I said, oh, no, honey. Right. Let me explain to you why she wins. Because she did not, the night before, choose something. Right. And, procrastinate to the last minute. And I was always determined not to be what I called the American Idol parent. Do you know, we've all seen those American Idol auditions, right? Where these people sound terrible. And you're thinking, no one has told them before they were on national television that they were that bad. Right. These are adults. We're not talking 3rd graders. These adults, they're there telling their kid that they're the best singer. And they're thinking, well, the parents are either deaf or I don't know, somebody, they didn't have a friend somewhere along the way that maybe said, this might not be your thing. Right. Right. And so that was when American Idol was very popular, when I had these kids in elementary school. And I thought, we do need to be honest with our kids at some point. Absolutely. And help them learn these lessons, because sometimes the false praise
does more harm. Yeah.
Then, so do you see a lot? I think there's been a lot more of that in this age of everybody gets a trophy than
I think
it used
there
maybe
has
than like
been.
1992 when you started. Have you seen that change?
Oh, it's mind-boggling, the change. It's mind-boggling to see this whole generation of kids who honestly believe they should be passed just because mom said.
Oh.
Instead of doing work. Instead of putting in the time and the effort to maybe pass with a C- or a D, just to do nothing and then have mom call and complain. And it's this feeling of entitlement that we did to ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
We did this to ourselves, and now we're reaping the reward.
Yeah. And I think later we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that, because that's a very interesting thing. And I think you, as an educator and as a teacher, you talked about parents learning about their teacher, the teacher of their children, and, their success and fail rate, and what, how they are as a teacher. So, let's just assume that people listening haven't ever done that. What you as a teacher, does it annoy you? What's the best way to approach a teacher to learn these things, to maybe get in the classroom and see what's happening there?
Especially
and how do you
that's the
feel
best
about
thing.
that? Yeah.
Especially in the upper grades.
As an educator, there is nothing that pleases me more than a parent who will call or email and say, "Can I come and sit in on your class?"
Really? Okay.
I love that. That to me is a parent who is being proactive for their child, who wants to see my teaching style, which admittedly is not for all students. Just like there's no one-size-fits-all education for children, there's no one-size-fits-all teacher for every child.
How does a child feel about that?
They hate it. They hate it. But I usually try to make it so that the parent doesn't come to their child's class.
Oh, I see what you're
So
saying.
they can just
so I'm
come
thinking,
and stop
I
in.
would have
Yeah.
died 1,000
Oh, I would have
deaths.
too.
If
That would have been
my
horrifying.
mother came and sat in
That
the
would
back
have
of
been
my class.
horrifying.
I'm thinking as a high school teacher,
parents
right?
do that as well. But yeah, I love it when parents come to see what's going on.
Excellent idea.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to get an idea of what a teacher is like. You can listen to your child. You can listen to the other kids in the neighborhood. You can listen to what they say about the teachers. I remember when my children were coming up through elementary school, they would always say, "Please, please, please don't put me in this teacher's class. She's the meanest teacher at school." And I knew right then that if all of the kids were saying she was the meanest teacher, that was the teacher I wanted for my children, because that was the teacher that was going to push them and make them better. And she was.
Do you really think, and this is just an honest question, do you really think all teachers are as inviting as you are?
No.
Okay, I was going to say, when you said that, I was a little shocked, because I found, again, I live in another state, and I found I was always very involved, elementary and some of middle school, but I realized as soon as you got to high school, they said no parents even chaperoning the dances. And I even asked one time, and I was very shocked by the answer, because I'm thinking I wanted to be involved. I said, "Why don't you have parents come, chaperone the dance?" "I don't think parents could handle it." Okay, well now
it's a whole legal issue. Now that's a whole different legal issue.
Right.
Now.
So there's other, but I found that generally, they don't want you in the classroom, and they don't want the involvement, and so that's why I'm a little surprised that she would say that, and I think it's awesome that you welcome that. But I am curious, especially in those older grades. It's very easy. Those elementary school teachers, they usually have so many things to get people involved. But especially in high school, and if you have any other suggestions of what parents can do.
I think at a large high school in a public district, it is a lot harder. I mean, when you're trying to cram 35 to 45 students in a class, it's hard to find room for another body. If you can't visit a teacher's classroom, schedule a time just to sit down and talk with them.
Okay.
I know we've got parent-teacher conferences, but really that's not the time. At that point, it's kind of too late.
Yeah.
The best time to talk to a teacher about your child's education is before that student even walks into your class.
Wow.
It's a chance for a parent and a teacher to sit down and discuss hopes for that child, issues the child might have that they're not going to be forthcoming with, issues that they might have with regards to education or with other students at the school. Communication is so key to success or failure for any student. And that includes the parents. The parents have to be communicative as well.
Okay. That's some great advice.
Yeah, that is. So we just need to be, I say we. I'm going to be a parent
You are.
someday. I'm just hearing you say you just have to be proactive. You have to get in there. You have to, even if it is hard, even if the teachers maybe don't want you in their classroom, you need to find a way to talk to them and figure out what's going on with your children's education.
Right. My parents always used to say it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. Well, as a parent, I want the best for my child, so I will squeak and squeak until I find the best.
Yeah, for sure.
And I just found a little bit of a diminishing return on that squeakiness as the kids got older. I mean, when I was younger, they loved my help. They loved me around. And I just felt increasingly a little bit pushed out in high school.
But that means you've done your job. If your child doesn't want you, if they can advocate for themselves, you don't need to squeak as loud.
Well, and that's
hopefully they're squeaking for themselves.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. So,
That's
and thank
true.
you for some
Hopefully
of those pointers, especially for those with that middle school and high school,
Absolutely.
when they how to resolve concerns, because I do find that's when a lot of parents start to really panic.
Absolutely.
I mean, my kids did, thank goodness, did pretty well advocating for themselves, but there's occasional need for, intervention and, anyway, to switch gears here.
And we don't want this to, raise your blood pressure or anything like that, but we want to talk about it.
Yeah. COVID.
Yes.
I just the challenges that teachers have had, and I've mentioned before, I have lost some sleep as I have thought of children who come from less than ideal situations, whether it be single working parent or even an abusive home or whatever, how these children have no voice in all of this. And, I've had educator friends who've said, oh, this is great. I mean, kids are learning all these modern forms of communication. This is wonderful. And I thought, if they have a family that's spinning it in that direction and there to fully support, but there's a lot of kids that I'm worried about this gap that's going to happen. How do you expect, how do we overcome this COVID gap, and what are your suggestions for parents? Because we're still not through it all.
I don't know that we are going to be able to overcome the gap. I really don't. What has happened this year is so unprecedented that I don't know that we're going to be able to overcome the gap. I think we're going to have to redouble our efforts and maybe lower our expectations for a while. It was such a bizarre time. I talk about it a lot with my students this year because they want to talk about it a lot.
Right.
They feel very cheated. They feel very left behind.
Rightly so.
They really do. And I keep reminding them, it's not just them. Teachers like me, I'm old, teachers like me had a really hard time last spring because we are not as proficient with the technological platforms that are available.
Right.
I was very lucky in my school that we had been required to learn Zoom and Canvas prior to this. So I had a very rudimentary skill level at the technology, but it was nowhere near what it should have been for something like this. So I feel bad that the students lost a lot. What we can do right now is go forward. Don't dwell on what we've lost, but go forward from where we are, which is something that I think the gospel teaches us anyway, line upon line. Right. We can't expect to lose a chunk of educational time and just jump to where we should be.
Right.
This year I teach 10th graders, and there's an amazing transformation that happens between the 9th grade year and the 10th grade year. A whole lot of maturity happens in these students. And when we got back to school this fall and I met my 10th graders for the first time, I was floored at how immature they were.
Interesting.
At how obnoxious and loud and disruptive they were. And it really bothered me until I sat down and realized they didn't get that last term of being a freshman. They didn't get that last 5-6 weeks of school to help them on that maturity level. They stopped and then they jumped back in. And it really has taken almost a half a year to get them to where they would have been if we hadn't had this disruption.
Wow.
But I can't dwell on that. I can't keep thinking that they should be a certain way, because they're not, and they're not going to be. I have to start here and move forward, line upon line. And whatever didn't get taught at the end of last year, that's where I have to start. So maybe my teaching has to go back a ways. But if I'm a good teacher, if I'm a teacher that loves teaching and loves the kids, that's what I'm going to do. Does it mean they're going to be behind when they graduate? Yes, it probably does. But does it mean that I will have taught them the critical thinking skills that they might have missed in that last 6 weeks of last year? Yeah. And to me, that's more important. It's those critical thinking, those listening skills that are going to help them when they are out in the real world. If they can learn to listen and to critically piece together information, I don't worry about that. I don't worry about their future. Whether they learn Julius Caesar or rhetoric or whatever, whether they learn that or not is less important than whether they learn to think critically, to think a problem through from beginning to end. That's more important.
So do you think they're learning
I do.
adaptation skills and
Yes.
coping skills?
Yes. I see
I
that
think
on
we're
a
all
daily
learning that.
basis. I think we are.
Yeah.
And I think that's hopeful. I think that's hopeful. I think that shows resiliency. I think we all started this year terrified of what was going to happen and where these kids were going to be. And I think as we've gone now halfway through the year, we can see that we're not where we want to be, but we're further ahead than we probably thought we would be.
Right.
We may have lost some, but we're teaching our kids how to adapt, how to move forward, how to think things through, and how not to let something like this get the better of them.
Right.
Which is huge.
So how do you think, people listening to this, probably parents, and what can they do to help with that, to help attempt to close this gap, to help with the critical thinking with all these different things?
Number one, listen. Listen to your child. When they come home from school and they are frustrated, listen and be empathetic. Not sympathetic. Be empathetic. I know, I understand that must be so frustrating. It must be so frustrating. These kids just want somebody to tell them that it's okay for them to be frustrated.
Yeah.
And it is. After the empathy, then comes the hard work. I understand you're feeling frustrated. I understand that you don't get it. Let's work it through. And I think that, if nothing else, this year has taught us that parents are that missing piece in the educational equation.
Yeah.
I can stand up and I can lecture and I can diagram sentences until my ink runs dry. But unless that parent is at home reinforcing that it's important, that this is a good skill to have, that child is not going to care.
So you just said two things that I want to circle back to: sympathetic versus empathetic. Because are you suggesting then, like, sympathetic is, oh, my poor baby, he's missing all this, so I'm just going to not expect anything of him because he's suffering.
Right.
He or she is suffering, so we're just going to drop these standards and, poor baby, right? Is that,
let's watch a
when I was
movie.
asking about, what was
Make
that?
some popcorn.
Right.
Let's just forget about our worries.
Let's just get you some ice cream and let you watch videos all day long.
And I think we did
Because you're
that.
sad.
I think we did that
I think we all did for a while.
last year.
Right.
I know that as educators, we dropped our expectations that last term of the year, and we just tried to survive.
Yeah.
It was really just try to keep that head above water as we're all dog paddling frantically to shore. But now, I think we really did a disservice to the students, because now that's what they're expecting. And they're expecting us to say, oh, yes, it's the end of the semester. Oh, you're failing. Oh, I'm so sorry. I will lower my expectations and pass you anyway.
So that's the sympathy
That's
versus
the sympathy.
I understand how you feel, and this is frustrating, but this is what we're doing anyway, and we're going to get you caught up, and we're going to...
And I think that's a good skill for parents to learn, the difference between empathy and sympathy.
I like that. That's why I wanted to, because I thought you touched on it, but I thought I wanted a little more emphasis there, because I do think that's one of the things that can be a little sabotaging.
Absolutely.
I
give full credit.
Play that sympathy card. They
do.
Real quick,
They do. I give all credit to this to my daughter, who we've had some issues with, and in working through therapy with my daughter, we've had to learn. My husband and I have had to learn empathy and not sympathy. As parents, like I said, we want to jump in, we want to fix, we want to protect, we want to coddle our babies. Where all my daughter really wanted was for me to say, "Oh, that must be so frustrating. That must be the hardest thing you have ever done. Wow, I am in awe that you went through this. As frustrating as it is, you amaze me." That's all she wanted. Not for me to jump in and fix her problems.
I love that.
But for me to just validate that she was having feelings.
Thank you for pointing that out. I think that is very instructional right there for parents. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. And I think maybe this will be one of the last things we talk about, but I want to talk about it because I think it's very interesting. So you have been teaching over a long period of time, and I'm sure things have changed drastically, and you touched on it a little bit earlier. So maybe just give us, how really have you seen things change in schools and in education, from when you first started teaching in 1992 up until now? Maybe just a few of the things that stick out to you the most. And then maybe after that, just a few things that parents can do to be ready for those things that are changing and to be more involved.
Awesome. Okay. I think the biggest change in education is a feeling of community among educators. Back in 1992, it was every teacher for herself, and it was a dog-eat-dog world. It was hard. It was rough, and there was no support. We didn't get support from administrations. We didn't get support from the state. We just got nothing. Now, I think we've learned that a support system is helpful for anyone. As a support system is helpful for a student, a support system is very helpful for a teacher. So I think education has become better because we've learned how to become a community. We've learned how to get together in professional learning communities and say, I'm having this problem. Is anyone else having this problem? How are you dealing with this problem? What can I do in my classes to eradicate this problem?
Do you feel that the internet, that's the other thing that's changed drastically from 92 until now, too. It's just technology. And I'm sure that just even the communication factor has probably gone up. And being able to share, because then you can also get outside your district even to a much larger, it has made everything far more global than it used to be.
It has. I think it's amazing and awe-inspiring and terrifying and destructive. I think there's good and bad, right? There's great things about the technology. These kids can get the information at the drop of a hat. But the bad side is they can get the information at the drop of a hat. So there's not a whole lot of work.
They didn't have
going
to go
into things
and look
right.
Look at the encyclopedia. Actually get up off their chair and go find an encyclopedia and look it up. Do you remember
encyclopedia?
that?
What's
exactly.
that?
And I tell my kids that. I said, you don't know how lucky you are. You get to snap your fingers and have the answers right there. But what that means is I expect a little more. You may have this answer, but where does that lead you? Where do you go from here? What do you do with that information?
So it could create some laziness in the instant gratification thing that is probably one of those unintended consequences.
But it is a beautiful tool as well.
Isn't it?
It has widened the circle of support.
Right.
It has widened those layers of depth to education that we can get by reaching outside of this bubble that we're in.
There's opposition in all things, though, isn't there? There's the good and the bad.
Absolutely. And again, that's where parents come in, too.
Right.
Because parents have to be able to put that boundary as well for their children.
I think we've all seen, here we're talking about the Family Proclamation, and I think we all know that in the last 30 years, the cohesiveness of the family unit has changed.
Yes.
The strength of families have changed. We have seen the disintegration. And in some of our episodes, we've interviewed people where they've talked about just an absolute agenda to diminish the strength of families.
Yeah.
So from 1992 until now, we know that there have been disintegrating families. Our society is seeing the fallout. In education, I am curious how that has affected education. Because here we talk about the strength of the family being paramount in our society and all of these things. And so as that has deteriorated, how has that affected education?
It's affected us a lot. I'm not here to judge anyone's idea of family.
Right.
But the best students, the most successful students, are students who have two parents who are concerned, and two parents who are involved in their child's education. Whether those parents are married and living together or whether they're divorced and living separately, if they are a cohesive unit, that child succeeds better in education. If one parent is out of the picture and doesn't care, that child has an excuse not to succeed. And we see it all the time. We see children using the excuse of, I was at my dad's this weekend, so I didn't have to do anything. Or I was with mom this weekend and we went to Mexico. So we get all of those excuses because the family system has broken so much that these children are being dragged in all kinds of different directions instead of two parents focusing on the success of their child and their future. So yeah, I think it's been very detrimental to the education of students. I've seen students rise above it. I've seen students who, of their own accord, have had to say, my education is more important than what I'm getting from my parents. And I have seen students who fall through the cracks because dad wants to be the fun parent on the weekend, or mom wants to be the disciplinarian, and or whatever. So there's both sides of that seesaw, and it's not a level playing field anymore.
Well, I'm sure you've probably seen parents, single parents. I know I have seen it myself. One really trying to overcompensate.
Absolutely.
Truly overcompensate for someone. I mean, they don't have control over the other parent, but they have these desires for their children to succeed and be happy. And that's what I love about, there's still so many wonderful parts in the family proclamation, just so many great principles that can help families that are even not the traditional ideal or whatever. There's still these principles, and I hope we still see that. And I want to encourage, I think that's one of the things we want to constantly encourage people through this podcast, is that there's still hope in correct principles wherever you may be on the spectrum. And sometimes that does mean overcompensating, compensating for something that may not be there.
I think it comes down to selfishness. And I think when you're a parent, you have to put your own agenda aside, and that child has to be number one. My brother and his wife have been separated for years. They just cannot live together, but they co-parent their two sons. They are on the same page. They both attend parent-teacher conference. They both have the same rules. It's the same rules at dad's house as it is at mom's house. It's that kind of unselfish behavior that's going to make those children successful. And I feel like that's where we're lost. We become very selfish in our desire to be the number one parent.
That does take a lot of humility and cooperation, putting yourself aside and your needs for your children.
It's hard even in a two-parent household.
Isn't that the truth?
To do that.
Isn't that the truth?
But that's what makes a successful family is putting family first and not yourself. And I think that's what the Family Proclamation is all about. Mothers and fathers working together. We've got this unit that is celestially ordained. And it all revolves around the principle of working together. One is not better than the other.
Well, and those 18 years fly by.
Oh, they do.
And that's where, if parents could understand, there is a sacrifice for this period of years. And if you can do this right, the rest, things do tend to... The payoff
really good in the end.
Isn't that truth?
Yeah.
That is the truth. Wow.
Well, thanks so much for spending so much time with us tonight.
You're welcome. I've enjoyed it.
We've just learned so much from you. Thanks. We love your perspective as an educator, as a teacher. And I know that people listening will have learned so many things about, things they can do to be more involved, and to help their children's education, and like in the proclamation, it's a sacred duty. And so we're just so grateful for that guidance. And we're grateful for you for taking a good portion of your life to assist with that, to teach.
Thank you. I love it. It's my calling.
Well, and thank you for taking that very seriously and for all those practical suggestions.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Raising Family podcast. This episode was produced by Carol Rice. Our research coordinator is Angela Valentine. Audio was edited and mixed by John Wright. The Raising Family podcast is brought to you by thefamilyproclamation.org.